a excellent panel for you. All of our panelists have transitioned out of corporate, and they're going to give you a very unfiltered version of how they navigated the franchise exploration process and their experience as franchisees. And just to give you a little background on me, as a franchise coach, I'm really a guide, a sounding board, and an advocate for my clients when they explore. And most importantly, I think to challenge assumptions and perceptions, because everybody brings those to the table, and have them peel back a layer of the onion to see if there's an opportunity there or not. And the work we do together is really just a big exercise in learning about different businesses to see if they are right or not for them. And it's very collaborative, and it's a lot of fun. So we're going to kick off the panel with introductions, followed by some questions, and then we'll open it up to the group. And Mike, we're going to start with you, followed by Shel and John. If you can just share with everybody, Mike, the franchise you invested in, how long you've been operating, and what was your corporate role before going into business, that would be great. And then we'll move it to Shel and then John.
Well, thank you, Harris. My name is Mike Delzingaro. I am located in a place called Garnet Valley, Pennsylvania, on the border of PA and Delaware. And I've been in the franchising business now for about 14 months. I met Harris back in May, June of 2020. I worked for a large water company, basically that was very heavily invested in the water space, called Xylem. I was a part of a small pump company that I helped grow from 20 million to 200 million, and then was a part of the leadership team that sold to a large conglomerate called Xylem, and then stayed with them for about 10 years and took a leadership package out of the business back in March of 2020 that let me have a little bit of a nice parachute to allow me to explore different options. And a fellow mentor and colleague introduced me to Harris, who introduced me to a product and a franchise called Units Moving and Portable Storage, which it was very heavily in the rental space, which was my background. Basically what prompted me to basically find a new beginning and a change in direction by the publicly held company that I work for allowed me to basically go into something that I was very familiar with, but also owning my own business to build some generational wealth and grow my own thing. And Harris introduced me to this company that allowed me to broaden and build. And I've been the fastest and most successful franchise to date, putting containers on rent, helping people move and solving their problems, moving from one area to another in the greater Philadelphia area. And basically, or they're renovating their house because they're sick of looking at what they've been living with due to COVID. And I think COVID helped our business, and I got lucky. And I'm in a great area, and that's what allowed me to land here. But I got to say, Harris helped me connect the proverbial dots from being a 56-year-old man that was looking for a new beginning with an established brand that was looking to expand into the Northeast.
Thanks, Mike. And will you just share with the group, I'm curious, and others may be as well, when you look at units, is it, how have you divided and conquered in terms of, I don't want to go too off track, but commercial versus retail to like the homeowner? What does that look like? Since who knows, there could be a customer here on the Zoom. on
a potential customer here. Well, and thank you for asking that. The splits for me, and I analyze that weekly, is 75% of my business is coming from residential. You know, I bought a territory, which is for some of the people that are on here. I heard some Philadelphia postcode, so I bought Delaware County, all of Delaware, Chester County, and the parts of Montgomery County that I grew up on the northwest side of the Philly. And basically, I've got 1.9 million customers to basically work with, households. So 75% of my customers are, you know, people that are looking to move, renovate, had a water pipe break or a sewer line back up, and they need to store something on site for temporarily. The other 25% are restoration companies, contractors, dry cleaning places that are moving from one area to another, schools, colleges that need temporary storage during semester, in between one semester and the next, or renovating a hall or the bookstore. And so that's the split that I'm seeing. And ultimately, my goal, only 14 months into it, is more of a 60-40 split, residential to commercial, to answer your question, Harris.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Shel, how about you? Tell us a little bit which concept and how long and what you were doing before.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is well today. I think the theme of Harris helping us seems to come across with everyone, and you'll hear a little bit about that. Right now, I am living in Orchard Park, home of the Buffalo Bills, originally from Liberty, New York, in the Catskill Mountains. I spent most of my adult life in the Boston, Massachusetts area. I was a chief financial officer for most of my career, 30 or 40 years or so, serving as a CFO for several public and private companies. My expertise turned out to be helping private equity companies buy the company I work for. So I did that 5 or 6 times. And those of you in corporate life, or even others, know that when a company gets sold, the 2 people that usually go are the CEO and the CFO, me being the CFO. So I was in transition many, many times. So back in 2016, when we sold the company that I worked for, I decided I kind of had enough of corporate life, looking for something else. I belong to an organization called the Financial Executive Networking Group that introduced me to the entrepreneur option, that introduced me to Harris. And Harris spent a lot of time interviewing me, interviewing my wife, looking for different concepts, what was important to us when we were looking for a business. I wasn't quite ready to retire. So he introduced us to many franchises, and I looked at a few of my own, none of which were as good as the ones that Harris introduced me to, of course. In 2017, so it's almost 5 years, I entered the franchise world and bought into a franchise called My Salon Suite. My Salon Suite is a national franchise. We now have about 200 locations. When I joined My Salon Suite, I was number 50. So we've grown about 150 locations since I joined. My Salon Suite leases suites to health and beauty professionals. So young entrepreneurs, stylists, massage therapists, eyelash techs who want to get out of the salon that they're in. They want to open their own business. They're looking for the freedom and flexibility that owning their own business will provide them. What we do is build a very upscale suite in about 5,000 square feet in either a retail environment location, or in my case, it's a former executive office building. So we build out the facility. We build out 30, in my case, 30 suites. And then we spend our time trying to find stylists and other beauty professionals to lease the suites. In my particular case, the concept was relatively new in 2017 here in Buffalo. So the startup, if you will, or trying to fill up our suites was a little bit longer in my case. And the company, in all honesty, has done a fantastic job over the last 5 years improving their support to help franchisees like myself fill their suites. Our facility is now full. It's been full probably for about 2 years. So the concept is working. It's semi-absentee. We have no employees, no food, which are 2 of the things that we were interested in looking for a franchise business opportunity.
Great. Thanks for that, Shel. John, we're going to kick it over to you. If you want to share with us your concepts and, how long you've been operating and what were you doing before you got into franchising?
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. My name's John Montgomery. I am in Chester County, Pennsylvania. I have dabbled in the corporate world a little bit, so have a little bit of a different profile than some of the other panelists. But nevertheless, shortly after college, I started a tri-state commercial painting business. Certainly, it wasn't tri-state when we first started, and did that for about 12 years. So I kind of had an entrepreneurial spirit to me. As that company was winding down for several different reasons, I started looking at franchising, and I invested in my first franchise. It was a Furniture Medic franchise, which pretty much was on-site furniture repair and restoration. Coming out of the commercial painting industry, I had a lot of contacts and thought that I could, drive this on-site furniture repair into my corporate contacts, but found that wasn't the case. But nevertheless, I did that for 5 years and had a great experience. I just realized that the product that I was working on wasn't necessarily a good fit for me. But nevertheless, it really opened my eyes to the value of franchising and franchising opportunities. I went on from there and did become a financial advisor with the Ameriprise for about 3 years. But in 2008, when the markets really corrected very hard, I hadn't built enough of a client base or a business base to be able to sustain that with 2 young children and a wife not working outside the home, and really had to reconsider my career path, and hence fell back to franchising. And I came across a company called Always Best Care Senior Services. What that company does is provide non-medical in-home care for primarily seniors in their homes. There were some other revenue generating opportunities in terms of helping families find assisted living communities for their loved ones, if that was the direction they were going to go. So that attracted me. I still have that franchise. I've been doing it for 12 years. It is a mature franchise at this point, where I am, for the most part, working on this business and not necessarily in it. I've built out a staff and have an employee base of over 100 employees doing in-home care, and then an administrative staff that runs the admin. And it's been a great experience. Working with the home office and developing a franchise business or model, if you will. When we first started with Always Best Care, we were the 48th franchise. There are now about 125 franchises nationwide. And because I guess I'm just a glutton for punishment, decided, don't have enough to do. And less than a year, going on a year, I'm going to call it a half year into it, I have bought yet another franchise concept that I am working on building right now in tandem to having my Always Best Care franchise. And that's called Apex Leadership Company. And primarily what we're focused on doing is bringing leadership training to elementary age kids, pretty much wrapped around a really, really effective and fantastic fundraiser for the schools. The other side of this business is you can also provide fundraising opportunities for other types of groups, primarily youth athletic groups. I've done some fundraising events for, girls softball teams. I am a girls softball coach for a travel team and that sort of thing. So my involvement with youth athletics kind of drew me to this franchise, and I have, bought the cake mix, and now I'm putting in the ingredients and seeing where it's going to go. But it's so far it's very enjoyable, and so that's my story, that's my background. So the last time I was on a panel with Harris, he called me a serial franchiser. So I guess that's what I am.
John, can you share with the group how long the runway was until you were no longer working in the business and you were able to work on the business? Like Shel's is a little bit different because it's a semi-absentee model. So I would say
Sure.
the runway was a little shorter.
Yeah.
Mike's is also a little different, but I know with senior care, a little bit longer of a runway. What did that look like?
I'll be frank with you. And when I say this, I don't intend to try to scare anybody who's considering franchising out of the model, if you will. But the first year or two, I just said, what have I got myself into? But nevertheless, unlike many other industries, senior care, there is quite a learning curve. I mean, some of the what I would say, what you would consider basic business practices don't necessarily always apply to the senior care model. And I think a lot of that was really me really starting to learn about an industry that I only had known about, passively through, watching my mother as a child. She wanted to get out of the house after having 6 kids and found great pride and a great experience in being a home health aide for seniors. So I saw that and I was like, okay, well, this is what mom did. Okay, this should be easy. What I didn't realize is that there's a lot of intricacies. There's a lot of things that you need to learn about the industry before you can become effective. But again, I stayed true to the model. I stayed true to the training and, the best practices that were prescribed for me to do. And, ultimately, lo and behold, it's turned out to be a wonderful experience. So that ramp up time for me was 2 years, but at the same time, it was 2 years of learning about the industry more than learning and applying the appropriate business practices to the industry as prescribed by the franchise model.
So actually, I was going to jump into some questions that I prepared for all of you, but I think what you just brought up is maybe a good jumping point. And maybe you can lean in on this, John, and then we'll switch over to Mike. How were you, because this question comes up a lot. It came up last night when I was chatting with a bunch of folks. How were you able to parlay your skill set, okay, into the new business?
Well, again, because I've been a small business owner, primarily for the first 12 years out of college, I started a painting company just because I was tired of looking for a job. I mean, it was laziness on my part. And so I created a business and I was very proud of that business. So again, I had gotten some good small business experience, but in terms of applying best practices and not shooting from my hip, no, that never happened in that first business that I created. It wasn't until I found myself into this Furniture Medic franchise model where all of a sudden you have support, you have best practices, you have, hey, this is really the best way to run your QuickBooks and your financials. Hey, we have some national advertising. We're going to send you some leads. We're going to send you support and that sort of thing. So it was taking, the practices and experience that I'd learned in being a small business owner and I guess founder or developer. It really helped me erase a lot of bad habits or, just not really knowing what the best way to conduct myself was.
That's interesting.
And so hence I had the small business experience, but I was really able to, I found a lot of value. I almost felt like, okay, I'm going back to grad school and really learning a little bit more about how to run a business through the franchise training model. And that came from Furniture Medic. And Furniture Medic is part of the Service Master Clean family of franchises. They've been around, for over 60, 70 years at this point. And they really did have franchising down to a science to the point where, okay, this is how we onboard a new franchisee. This is how we get them up and running, and so hence you had that support. And that was really very valuable to me in terms of an education that was very practical and applicable. So hence, and that's what I found. always best care now. I'm 12 years into it, and I still rely heavily on a supports coordinator. I mean, as a matter of fact, as soon as we get off this line, I am going to be on to a call with my supports coordinator. And then later today, I have a supports coordinator with Apex, which I will be in touch with today because we're planning some strategies for next week. So that's, I mean, I had, so again, just to circle around, I had some basic small business experience, but the franchise models that I participated in have helped me really, pursue best practices and get on the winning track.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, that recipe. Mike, you want to lean in here? How do you think you were able to take your skill set and parlay that into units?
That's a great question, and thanks, Harris. I worked for a small pump rental company called Gubin Pumps in South Jersey, and started there back in '98. Very entrepreneurial spirit, and managed the Northeast for the company and helped to open up. We basically expanded from about $20 million in annual revenue to 200 million by opening up individual branches. I helped open up in North Jersey, Connecticut, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. Those small branches were basically extensions of our corporate facility, and they were standalone businesses, anywhere between $2 and $20 million businesses that helped us grow our overall network. And I was involved with helping to grow us from 10 branches to 27 branches in that 12-year period. So each one of those branches were individual entities like franchises, where we extended ourselves, our network, our reach, and we had people and equipment and basically manpower there to supply to the local industrial, sewer, wastewater utilities in those markets. And I'm a mechanical engineer by my background. So the equipment and the solutions that we're providing were very relevant to those markets. And, I owned a P&L. We grew the business from 27 branches when we sold in 2010 to 50 branches when I left the business in 2020. And again, emulating and growing and putting people in place. The challenges were, people and equipment that really, could be your biggest asset and also your biggest headache. And I learned from those things, knowing that I wanted something simpler, not as intense as far as just labor and people wise. And, looking at franchising, that was one of my expectations when I wanted to own my own business, was to, basically have some good, I understood rental. That was easy for me because that's what I grew up in. So when Harris presented this units moving and portable storage franchise, I love the fact that I could move portable equipment. It's capital intensive. The outlay of cash up front's $4 million. Maybe for some of you, that's not a lot of money. For me, it was. So buying 300-400 of these containers and to compete with the Kleenex of that market, AKA pods, is, it's crazy to go into that. It's like competing against ABC and NBC and CBS if you want to start your own TV station. So, but what I understood was managing a small business, which is what my branches were. I wanted less people and I wanted a simpler business model. And I understood the reoccurring, wonderful rental business, because you make great equipment, you rent it out, and then you use it over and over again. And that to me was a model that I understood implicitly with our pump business. So it was an easy stretch for me because of my engineering background to understand the mechanics, the equipment I had to use, and some of the challenges that I knew those things would bring. But managing a small business is what we did in my previous life. And it's hard because you're working when others aren't. That's this business. It's like being in real estate, because people are not thinking about moving in storage during their day job. They're on the work, they're working, they're taking care of things. They're typically doing this outside of their normal day 8 to 5 job. That's the challenge in this franchise, but you're solving their problem, bringing a solution. It's one of the biggest stress points moving that people basically deal with on top of marriage, having a kid. And so they fall into that category, and you're there to answer the phone and take care of the problem. And I felt really comfortable with that.
Nice. And I'm curious, Shel, on your perspective, because for Mike, units wasn't as much of a stretch, but you're a CFO, you're a numbers guy, and now you're in, people would say you're in the beauty industry, which it's really, you're more of a landlord. But how did you parlay that skill set into, My Salon Suites?
Yeah, thanks, Harris. Prior to becoming a CFO, I was in public accounting early on in my career. So being in public accounting, I was introduced to many, many different types of companies, small companies, large companies. So I got involved in a lot of the operational aspects of those companies, from the marketing side, from the investment side, from running a company. So basically, it's kind of a general business knowledge that I felt I had, coming out of public accounting. And then, of course, in the companies that I was helping to run as a CFO. So I partnered with, the marketing folks or the engineering folks or the construction folks in all of the companies that I worked for. So I had a general understanding of all the functional areas, and admittedly, probably the weakest area I had was in the sales and marketing side, because as a financial guy, although I did sell, in terms of investments and meeting with investment banks, I didn't really sell and know how to market. So finding a franchise that had a good sales and marketing support to help us find those tenants was very, very important to me. So yeah, the rental model that Michael was talking about is kind of similar to what we do. It's a little bit different. We lease suites, of course, but then becomes an annuity when the suites are then full. So we now spend our life trying to deal with operations, and the time that I spend on the franchise is a whole lot less than when we originally started. But I'm sorry, go ahead. You were going to ask me a question.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, no, keep going, and then I have a question for you.
Yeah, one of the biggest issues I had, of course, and luckily I had a lot of construction background during my years as a CFO, but there is an investment in My Salon Suite where the construction side was probably the most difficult, and living through probably a 5 or 6 month construction process to get our facility started was probably the most challenging. But understanding the return on investment that when you invest in having to construct was very important to me, and it helped me understand and kind of get through that process.
And now I forgot what I wanted to say. Shoot, I should have jumped in right there and then. You know what? Let's go back to something you said earlier. You touched upon it, but can you share more about what your drivers were for business ownership? Because a lot of people are thinking, hey, maybe I want to be my own boss, or I want more flexibility. I've had, clients say to me in the past, something that's intellectually stimulating is important to me. Hey, I've got gas left in the tank. I mean, everybody's got something different, and I think yours were pretty unique. So if you want to share that, I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I always say kind of a funny thing happened on my way to retirement. I wasn't ready. I've got a special needs daughter who's now 21. My wife is very much involved in her care and was really not able to work outside of the house. So it really was me. So finding something where she could participate. She does have a paralegal or legal background, which helped me. Trying to find the right opportunity to allow me to utilize my business skills. I never had my own company. I always worked for somebody else, but deep down inside, in my heart, in my head, I wanted to see if I could do something on my own. And that really was the driver. I wanted to keep active. I wasn't ready for retirement in our life here. I'm not the retiring type. I couldn't go off and travel throughout the country. So I wanted to become involved. I wanted to be able to use the skills that I had and that had developed over the corporate world. So that really was the driver for me to do it. I wanted to just kind of run my own company. My father owned his own company in the wholesale produce business in the Catskill Mountains, and I always kind of watched him, do his thing. So it always intrigued me, to be able, to do that. The other driver for me in terms of the types of company is working with people that I thought were excellent in terms of their professional background. So I'm not sure if I can touch on it right now, but the franchisees within My Salon Suite, come from all walks of life, but most importantly, they are all, very experienced. We have engineers, we have medical professionals, we have marketing professionals, we have bankers, we have a whole lot of different types of franchisees. So the support network that we have amongst our franchisees, which now number about 200 or so, we rely on each other for help, in terms of both starting up our own franchise and helping build it as we kind of fill up our suites, and then gets to the operational aspect of operating a franchise. In my particular case, I didn't really want to open more than one location. It's just not kind of where we are in our life, and opening one, getting the return on the investment for one was fine for us. But there are many other franchisees within My Salon Suite that have multiple locations. Most have about 3. There's one in Texas that owns 10. So My Salon Suite gives us the opportunity to open many more if we were so inclined.
I remember my question. Now that you're in semi-absentee compared to what John and Mike are doing, about how many hours now that the business is up and running are you putting in?
Yeah, that's a good question, Harris. We have to report that every week, every month rather, to the franchise. That's one of the things we report. So on site, on location, while we were building out the franchise and filling up the suites, it was probably about 100 hours at the location, doing various things. In my most recent month, which was January, of course, I took a vacation in January, and I spent 8 hours on site, for the entire month of January. There are certain things that I do that other franchises don't do. So I do all of the accounting and the billing because that's kind of my background, and I kind of still like that. I do all the financials, I do all the tax work. So that is what I do at home, in my home office. But there are many franchisees that farm that out, and therefore spend a whole lot less time on site. So I would say probably it averaged about 40 hours a month, which is like 10 hours a week on site. Then, being home and doing it all kind of my home office, I'm on and off, all day. So, on and off. So I'll do some billing, which may take, 3 hours a week, one day, or I'll meet with the franchise, for marketing and sales support another couple of hours a week. So now that we're full, the time is much less. I'm not interviewing, new stylists and new beauty professionals like I was when we first opened.
So one of the attendees, Morris, shared a question. He said, who runs the day-to-day for this business if you're not running the business? So, and Morris came in a little bit late into the call. So, Morris Shel is the owner of My Salon Suites, and he's got a big location, let's say 10,000 square feet with 30 salon unit rentals. So essentially he's like a landlord. So
I'm sorry, Terrace.
That's okay. Once it fills up, but it's a good question, right? Because sometimes it's hard for people to wrap their head around. What do you mean you're only putting in 10 hours a week? I mean, that's foreign, right? Because we're all used to working for the last 30 years, every day, Monday through Friday, however many hours. So when you say it's semi-absentee and it's 10 hours, it's like, well, what's happening when you're not there? So you tell us what's happening. Nothing. You're not doing anything, right?
I mean, in my case, the biggest issue for me, is making sure that just things in the operational side are good. I mean, I kind of laugh when I say this, but one of the biggest things is keeping the restrooms, clean and neat, and making sure that, the shampoo bowls, don't have leaks or something in it. I do have, cleaning staff now, that come in, every day. So when we first opened, yeah, I was in there because I didn't want to pay, somebody to clean, let's say, before we were cash break even. So I was in there doing that. So I have that. I have people that are now on call for maintenance issues. So if I'm away for 2 weeks, I leave them with a number and, something happens. Now, of course, things do happen. I was out of the country, and I get a call from somebody, oh, my shampoo bowl is leaking, what do I do? So ordinarily, I would be up there, interestingly, and I've learned how to do those things. I was never a hands-on guy, but I kind of like little projects. But now, I have people at least that can be called, in case of an emergency, if something happens, in their particular location. It's a little bit different now than before we were full. I mean, if I wasn't around and we're still trying to fill up our suites, there isn't really anybody else that would take that over. So that just kind of gets postponed. I would not interview potential lessees, when I was away. But those are the biggest issues now, is kind of the operational, as you would imagine, as a landlord, everything can go wrong in a particular location.
Absolutely. Mike, do you want to jump in here? You touched upon some of your drivers, but do you want to elaborate on that?
I can, Harris. Yes. I think, first of all, I heard a few of the two other franchisees talk about where they came up. And I always worked for small entrepreneurial companies, a couple turned public, made some good money basically when they turned public and got to ride those ways in the 90s and early 2000s, but never had something that was mine. So, building some generational wealth and leaving something for my 3 girls, it was very important to me as a driver for starting this business for my wife and I. Having some reoccurring revenue when I would get to the point where Shel is, and basically take more of a back seat. I was very intentional. I'm one of 10 children. I have a younger brother that's 9 years younger than me, and I chose him and asked him to come and join our business so he can take over the operations in a couple, 3 years when I can back out when I get to 60 and not have to be involved with the business as much as I am, and allow him to grow that. And then maybe one of my daughters or my son-in-laws at some point might want to get involved. But that to me is important for Amy and I to basically then have some reoccurring revenue from, or income from, the business, but more in a, basically in a semi-retirement, basically role. And then
Mike,
build something.
Let's be fair. You're not slowing down at 60. Okay. Let's be honest.
Probably not. I would agree, Harris, because I got a lot of energy, but needless to say, I really enjoy one of the other things I want to do is spend more time with my wife. We love traveling. COVID basically created a little bit of a gap for that, but I like being with her, and she's in the business. She helps me put orders in. She takes some calls. She helps with our social media posts, posting onto the unit's webpage that they've created, that basically we have a link to share some of the stories that we're doing and some of the success and some of the customers that we're helping in the greater Philadelphia market. And there are things that she can lean in on and help us. And she's just good at that. And that allows us to work together more and be around one another more, because I was traveling 5 days out of 5 in my previous life. And that was hard. And I needed a change. And this allowed me to do that. So they were some of the things that really made me be very selective when Harris teed up different franchises. I love the painting one. The plumbing one actually was really attractive to me. But this rental model and the ROI that I understood was just, it was a home run. And it just fell into place for me. And it checked all the boxes for me when I said, what do I want out of this franchise? And I had a good established brand. I didn't have to create all that stuff. I'm great at sales and marketing, but I don't want to do all that IT stuff. I don't want to do all that technology stuff. And units had that for me, and I didn't have to create all that from the ground up. I had a running head start.
Great. And you mentioned ROI, and Morris just asked that question. So Mike, I want you to continue. And if you start to go off on a tangent, I already spoke to Michael about this. We both love to talk. I'll cut him off. Okay. But his question was, how do you judge the risk on the capital investment when you get started? And I had a similar question, which was, how were you able to figure out the ROI? And then I'd love to have John jump in on that, and then back to Shel.
So in my previous life working with a small company like Gubin Pumps, I understood what it cost, because I'm an engineer and I have a manufacturing and engineering background. I understood what it takes to bring a market, to design a product, what it costs to manufacture it. And then in this business, what's the return on investment is basically the number of times you have to rent it to basically break even. And that's not hard to figure out between, basically the cost to invest in each one of these containers costs me $4,500. How much are they renting with the transportation on a monthly basis? And what's your return on investment to break even? And these products don't wear out. They basically, they'll last 20 years. So they'll pay for themselves in about 2, and then the rest of it's gravy, guys. I understand it's a $4 million investment in big equipment, heavy equipment. That didn't scare me. It basically, but there's some risk. What's the risk? The risk is that, this model is, and the market is satiated enough with some incumbents that I couldn't take share. But I understood that answering the phone, basically helping people and following up were easy ways that I understood from a sales background that I could maintain and take share from some of the incumbents in this market and win. And therefore, I felt like my risk was very low because I know how to do that. And because I had a rental background, I understood what the ROI model was in a different business, which was no different with these static containers. And I built a pro forma that I put in front of units, because one thing, guys, the people that are on this call, they're looking at franchises, they don't just tell you, here's the cookbook, because they don't know what your performance is going to be. You have to somewhat develop that pro forma to see what that return on investment is going to be. And that took me a little bit of time to tweak before I said, I like this.
So before we jump to John, talk about market saturation, because that was another question. And a lot of times, clients will say to me, well, how do I know that this is going to work in my area, right? There's 12 different burger joints, right? I mean, I don't do a lot of fast food, but that's always the question, right? Like, how am I going to compete, right? In your case, when I think about it, just as a consumer driving around in my neighborhood, by the way, I see units in Upper Dublin after we had the tornado, but you see pods.
They're mine.
I know it is. Pods, Pack Rat, all these national providers who don't give you, the love and attention that you want, and you're calling into a 1-800 number and they don't know you from Adam. With you, it's a much more personal touch, but that's competition regardless. So how do you figure out market saturation and get comfortable with, hey, this is going to work or not going to work, et cetera?
So what I saw was, and that's a great question, because I saw these fixed storage companies, Extra Space and Cube Smart, they're opening up on every corner within, 4 or 5 miles, every so often. King of Prussia, there's one going in Newcastle, there's one going in Abington. So I'm thinking to myself, what, and then movers seem to be continuing to pop up, but they're not very reliable. So where pods, to me, is actually going to continue to grow. I think the market and where we're taking share from is fixed storage, and also movers, who basically are too expensive for certain demographics. And I understood the demographics where we wanted to point our guns, if you will, and basically point our resources to take share. And that was the movers. And frankly, the fixed storage community that basically was trying to grow as well. And when I saw these growing, I felt there was a place that I can take some share. And there was some risk there, but I felt like, to your point, Harris, the fact that you're answering the phone, there's no call center, you don't get some person, and when you ask what's the width of your container and they give it down to the millimeter or to the 1/8 of an inch, people don't understand that. And when you tell them it's 8 foot wide and 8 foot tall and 16 feet long, and it's the size of a Jetta, they get that. They understand that because they're talking to a real human being who's locally owned and operated, which is a huge differential today. And that's what the business that my wife and I started is doing. And It's hard, but it's also, to me, it's very clear that what I have to do and how to take and maintain share.
Yep. John, kicking that over to you, how did you figure out the ROI for Always Best Care? And then again for Apex if you think that's relevant. And then
Sure.
also after that, just touch upon market saturation, because there's so many senior care companies out there, right? I
Oh,
always
yeah.
share with clients, there's 320 million people in America. That's a lot of people. That's why there's, Burger King, McDonald's, Elevation Burger, Shake Shack. I mean, I could go on and on and on with burger joints, right? I always use that as an example. So I'm curious, again, ROI for ABC and then market share.
Well, I'm going to kind of parlay off of Michael's point that he made. I mean, you can pretty much lay out an ROI based on the information that you get through the franchise FDD and that sort of thing. And I've done that. I've done that with, I didn't do it so much with Furniture Medic because I was rolling into a franchise model and I just kind of went into it with blind faith and, but learned a lot along the way. But when I invested in, so the driver for me to go into ABC was simply that, hey, I have a young family. I need to really, I was in my mid to late 40s and realized that corporate America isn't interested in somebody like me who, has a lot of baggage in terms of needs to support a family and that sort of thing, and realized my roots are in small business. Hence, the driver for me was I need to, tap into my small business experience roots, but then also I had a family that I had to provide for. And, so that was the driver to look at ABC in terms of what its scalability upside was going to be. So hence, yes, I did a pro forma, set some goals, set out a business plan and that sort of thing. But, to Michael's point, you can have your pro forma on paper, but it's a function of you and how you apply yourself into this business. And it's not necessarily always going to go the way you expect it to go, but staying focused and pursuing through, the good times, the bad times, the hurdles, and finding the opportunities, you find your way. So hence now I have this mature ABC franchise and I have some time on my hands, kind of like Michael, I can't sit still. So I needed to find something else. But at the same time, I will be 60 years old this year and beginning to think about, okay, what's an exit plan and what can I do that, hey, might take some, upfront effort for a couple of years, but ultimately then become more of an absentee owned franchise and revenue source for me. And that's what that was the driver into Apex, is just that, is that I'm spending a lot of time self-marketing the programs, getting out to schools, introducing myself, introducing the concepts and that sort of thing. But once you get these programs up and running, schools oftentimes 95, or I should say 87% of the time will rebook. So you're making the sale once, and then it's a matter of just, client relationship at that point. I do have to build out teams to run programs in these schools. And that's the other side, but that's kind of a lot of fun for me. You're working with a youthful group of people presenting, leadership training to elementary schools. And so there's a buzz. So hence that fits what I need out of something. So the other thing is the driver for Apex for me is that this is a business that, ultimately as I scale down or choose to sell Always Best Care, which is probably the direction I'm going to go, I can manage the Apex business that I'm working on building from home. And again, it's on a school year model. So I've got, major holidays, summers, that sort of thing off. So that was that. So hence that's the driver as I'm looking forward into the next 5 years. Same with Apex. I mean, I am finding, hey, this concept isn't as readily accepted and believed as I thought it would be when I first purchased the franchise. So I'm running into a barrier right now with saying, okay, I'm probably not going to meet what I was expecting to do my first year, but hey, I've learned a lot, and now I have different angles and that sort of thing. I will probably come 75% of what I was expecting to do my first year, but the learning curve has been terrific, and tells me, okay, now this is what I do with the 75% success in terms of parlaying it into getting back on track and meeting my closer to 2.5 to 5 year plan for the scale up of this business. So yeah, you have to do your pro formas. You have to have a goal. You have to have a direction. You have to have a business plan. But at the same time, don't expect that, as you're applying yourself and pursuing this plan, that you have to be flexible and know that you've got to kind of, make adjustments along the way.
Yeah, it's going to ebb and flow for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, Shel, I'm curious to get your perspective on ROI and market saturation, because I could put two CFOs in a room, share the same exact concept, and one CFO says, Harris, this is great, no brainer, and the other CFO says, I would never do this. So how did you figure out the ROI and that market saturation for the model?
I'll try to keep it, it could be very simple or it could be complex. And, I'm not trying to be facetious about that. But if you think about building out a facility, so you're building out a facility, so you have construction cost. So in my case, and I'll be honest about it, the construction cost, let's say, is $750,000. It's about $150 per square foot. So, you've got the construction cost, and then you have the leasing cost to lease your facility. And then you take the number of suites that you're going to have in your facility, what the rental rate, might be for those suites, and then you can run those numbers, pretty quickly. And it turns out that probably in a full location, you could probably return your investment in about 3 years or so. And that's kind of the simplistic way of looking at it. For me, in terms of evaluating whether it would be a good investment, one of the things certainly was looking at the existing franchisees that were out there. The number one question I had, has anyone failed? Has anyone, not made it? And what I found out is that nobody has failed, at My Salon Suite at the time that I went in, and nobody has failed, since I've been in it for about 5 years. The other thing that I looked at is the type of franchise, and the suite concept was relatively new. There are 2 players in the upscale. It's My Salon Suite and Sola Salons. I wanted to make sure that we were either the best, in terms of quality, which I think we are, because our approach was not one where, we were cutting corners and trying to save money on the construction. It was very upscale. So we wanted to make sure that it was at least top of the line, in terms of the product that we offered. In my particular case, I probably took on a little bit more risk than I expected, because at the time that we invested, the suite concept was relatively new, and the market here in Buffalo was really new. Sola Salon, had just opened one, so people didn't even know what salon suites were all about. So the break even, which was pretty easy to calculate, was about 50% of capacity. So if you have 30 suites, when you hit 15 suites of lease, you were at cash break even. In my case, I opened with 8. So I opened at 25% of capacity. So I was well short of the 50% that was needed to do cash break even. I hit that mark probably about 6 or 8 months in. So at least I knew at that point I was at cash break even. And then, once we were full, I was at the run rate, which would have given me a 3-year payback. Now, the franchise, I just want to point that out, in the time that I invested till now, has made great strides. So those that are opening new My Salon Suite locations are opening at 90% full. So they are basically hitting the ground running at the time they open their location. So they are truly getting, a return, or a projected return, of probably about 3 years from the date that they open. which is a whole lot different than, what happened, when I invested. If I had the, the capacity, just intellectually and time, to do it again, I would be in a much better position to get that return quicker than what I experienced. I hope that
Thanks.
answers your question.
No, it does. And I have a million more questions for you guys, but I think what we should do is open it up to everybody who's here, because I'm starting to see some questions populate. And I'll just throw out one of the questions that Morris asked. Well, there's two, but how have you all been impacted by the labor shortage or turnover of workers? And that's a question that always comes up when I'm talking with clients. So, Shel, well, you might have an interesting perspective because you don't have a lot of workers, but in terms of labor, let us know what you think, and then we can jump to Mike and then John.
Yeah, you're right, Harrison. In my case, because I don't have employees, so I don't have to hire anybody. So labor shortage, doesn't impact us, one bit at all. So, that was certainly the good thing. The pandemic, had its pluses and minuses. For example, when salons were mandated to close, here in New York State, we had to close our facility for about 3 months. So I took that as an opportunity to say, just in terms of business sense, I stopped collecting rent, from all of our tenants. So, it was a cash drain. I still had to continue to pay rent to my landlord because they were not as kind as I was to my tenants. So it hurt. It was a pain at the time. However, for the long-term business, everybody was certainly appreciative, emotionally, and very appreciative financially. So what that allowed me to do then was to keep all of the tenants that I had. So when we reopened, they were hitting the ground running when we reopened. And oh, by the way, the pandemic made our concept, that much more attractive. So people being able to operate a salon, their own salon, in a private, safe environment, was key. So when the pandemic started, all of a sudden, all of the My Salon Suite locations, were in very high demand, by stylists. So not only the stylists that wanted to run the business, but clients that wanted to come and get their hair done or get a massage or get some other service, felt very comfortable in our environment, rather than going into a salon that maybe had, 20 or 30 people in it, couldn't be socially distant and all of those other things.
Interesting. John, how about you? What about labor, especially with senior care?
Yeah, we are very labor intensive, and the pandemic has definitely, impacted us in terms of the labor shortage. It affects, any and all industries that are looking for labor. But I'd say one of the saving graces for us is simply that the senior care industry has a very high turnover in normal times. So one of the ongoing functions of senior care is constantly recruiting. So because we, are kind of in that model anyway, the labor shortage, just made, one of the regular functions of our business that much more challenging. We've had to raise rates. We've had, raise pay rates, but simultaneously we've also raised our rates for providing the service. So that's kind of kept in step for the most part with private and some of the other entities that we bill for. But yeah, I'm not going to lie. The labor shortage has definitely affected us, and it's just a fact of life at this point, and it's what we have to work through. It has certainly also hindered our ability to grow in certain segments. But again, I can't say, and I won't say that it's brought us to our knees. It's just made it a bit more challenging for us, is really what it boils down to.
And Mike, what about you? It's kind of a lean and mean team, and you got some family there, but any thoughts on the labor?
Well, and I appreciate that because labor is just starting to be a challenge that I'm just starting to enter into. I need to hire both a part-time and probably a full-time driver. It's my brother 99% of the time, and then I jump in when we just have too many deliveries to make. I've actually got to get off here shortly because I've got 2 deliveries to make this morning. So, but at some point, we are starting to advertise for a driver. I got my one brother-in-law who's basically semi-retired that's going to come on and help us part-time as we enter into the spring season, which is busy. So every other franchise owner that has units in the other Philly guy that basically has the units franchise and that you introduced me to in Baltimore is tells me every day how hard it is to find drivers, people on the operations side that want to get their hands dirty, be out in the weather and the elements. So I expect that will be a headache for me, and to make sure that I vet out and find the right person that's going to want to do this every day. Because one day it's, in the summer, it's great. You're outside, but it's 95. And then, it could be 18 degrees and you're delivering containers. And then you're going to need a person that's going to need to deal with those 2 bookends, which the weather is always a challenge. And finding people that want to deal with this labor intensive business is going to be probably my biggest challenge going into 2022.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I work with clients, the thing I drive home to them about labor, because that comes up all the time, you want to keep asking that same question during your exploration with other franchisees, right? So you get to this validation stage, which I always talk about, and that's simply speaking to other franchisees that are already in the system. And you're going to ask that same question 5, 6, 7 times to all these different franchisees, and you start to hear a common theme. And that's a common theme that you're going to either be able to absorb and deal with, or you're not going to be comfortable around that. So, there's always a way to get your answer when it comes to that or any other question. Another question is, this is a good one. Any examples of the terror of growing pains at the beginning of the business, or a time when you thought it was a mistake to be in the business and then how you dug out? So panic mode, buyer's remorse. Anybody have any, Mike, what was your buyer's remorse?
So 6 months in, guys, I was driving our truck. It's about $150,000 vehicle that carries our containers to the local franchise in Baltimore, because we were doing a exchange. Somebody was moving from Wilmington down to Severna Park. And I was going to go to their facility. And this young man ran my truck into the parapet wall over the Tidings Bridge going from on 95 going to Baltimore. And my delivery system is specialized. You can't just find another one like a car and say, I'm going to rent this from Hertz or from Avis. And he knocked me out of commission. I had 120 containers on rent that I had to service, and he knocked me fully out of commission for 2 months. And I thought to myself, what the hell did I get myself involved with? And he just took my vehicle, my bread and butter. I didn't have another one of these. And I didn't have renter's insurance. So I had to go out and find a solution. And I rented a truck every day that cost me, with a driver, that cost me between $1,500 and $1,800 a day for 60 days to make my business basically sustainable. Cost me $80,000 of our own money. And I thought to myself, what the hell did I get myself involved with? This just totally shut me down. But we found a place, we pivoted. I put a lost business case together against the guy that hit me and drove me into the parapet wall, and we made it through. And what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And frankly, it made me more viable. It made the business and franchise smarter. I found and challenged the insurance company to come up with lost business riders, which we didn't have, and I didn't know I needed, and a solution in renting a truck that I had to basically pay for, but I just got a big check from Ryder to pay for what I lost from June to August of last year. And I got to tell you guys, I should have bought a second truck. That was shame on me. Another 150 grand. It wouldn't have been a lot of money relative to the stress and pressure it put on me during those 2 months. And I got to tell you, it challenged whether I made the right decision. And that, nothing against the ROI, Nothing against the people that I had around me. It's just something that I did not know was going to happen.
Hmm.
And
Talk about an unexpected situation. I mean, that's like, forget it.
scared the
Yeah.
hell out of me, Harris. I mean,
Yeah.
gotta tell you, brother, it did.
Shel, John, any moments of, oh my gosh, what am I doing?
I'll chime in real quick. I mean, for me, clearly the biggest issue was going through construction of our facility. You know, it was very, very frustrating, very time consuming. You know, there's always problems, you know, in construction. It's a complicated construction. If you can imagine 30 suites, you know, between, you know, plumbing and electrical and, you know, and our design is complicated as well. So that was the biggest challenge, you know, whether we were actually going to get through it and get to open the facility. One of the things that saved me in that, again, was looking at all of the other franchisees and keeping your eye on the prize and seeing that everybody ends up getting through it, right? And everybody's got a problem. So that was the important thing about sharing with other franchisees. So, you know, some people had issues with HVAC, some had with electrical, some had with plumbing, some had with wallpaper. I mean, everybody had issues, but everybody got through it, you know, and that was one of the things that at least enabled me to kind of live with it. And kind of, as I said before, the risk that I took was a little bit more at the time, you know, in hindsight, you know, than I had imagined, you know, and now, you know, the franchise, which is a little bit more mature, you know, has 3 more construction VPs to help. You know, they have other partners. So the franchise has come a long way to help the franchisees than when I originally invested.
John, before we jump to you, Shel, there's another question. How was the permitting process for you? It's been a big hurdle for me, and that's from Mark.
Yeah, it was not easy. You know, we ended up with an architect who was based in Arizona, you know, who said they were licensed in New York, you know, and as it turns out, you know, the building inspector here in New York, you know, had certain criteria that New York State had that the guy in Arizona ultimately did not really understand. Again, it was, in hindsight, you know, I probably should have had an architect that was a little bit more present here in New York State, which would have made the permitting and the you know, the building inspection and the approval process, you know, a little bit easier. Again, we ended up getting through it. I mean, in the time, I thought it was terrible. You know, it was like a 2 or 3 week delay. You know, my God, how are we going to live through this? But again, 5 years later, you know, it's kind of in my rearview mirror, you know, and done. And I'm sort of laughing to myself because part of me wants to say, now that I know all of these issues, I kind of like to go through it again because I could do it a whole lot better. You know, but I just don't have the bandwidth. You know, everybody says, you know, they're approaching 60. You know, I'll admit it, I just turned 70. So I don't really have that, you know, in my interest, you know, to move forward.
So Shel, I should have joined Harris's panel, but I wasn't sure I'd be able to join the call. But I'm 10 months into franchise business, and I'm doing it as a second job because, as you can see, I'm in my corporate office where I spend most of my day. But my franchise business is boutique fitness,
Okay.
and it's a cycle studio called Cycle Bar for exponential fitness. Great brand. Did all the things that all you guys talked about, did my homework, did my pro forma. I was in transition, did a long due diligence. And my vision was take a corporate role, start getting a franchise business up and running, pay it back 2 years, get another one, pay it back 2 years, get another one. I just turned 60. And then by maybe 70, start selling them off. And of all the things that and I didn't want to buy a business. I wanted to start one from scratch so that when I started buying others, then I learned the hard way. And my contractor submitted permits in August to do the gut out of our facility, which was a restaurant. And he got permits done in 3 weeks. He got it gutted out, and they turned the site over to me in September. And he submitted his permits for my build out in October. and he's resubmitted them twice, and no one at the township ever knows where they are. And my entire livelihood right now sits with bureaucrats in a township permitting office.
Mm.
And every day, never knowing if you're ever going to get permits approved. So it's like, no matter how much homework you do, no matter how much due diligence you do, there's something unexpected that is now 3 months where right now it's a nosebleed, but it's a couple months away from a hemorrhage.
Yeah, Mark, I'm sorry to hear that. And you're right. You just never know. I mean, it's you could do as much due diligence as humanly possible and gather as much information as you need to make a well-informed decision, and you just never know what curveball is going to be thrown your way.
And like the obstacles the other said, people say, is everything okay? And I go, no, it will be though. I know it will be. I'm still very Exponential Fitness is a great a franchisor. The Cycle Bar brand is a great brand. It's going to be good, but it's hard to sell. It's a membership sales, and people want to know, when do you open? And
Right.
you're 6 months going, I don't know.
Yeah,
So once you get that construction timeline, then you can tell people, hey, look, we got delayed, but we're opening in 12 weeks. Come
exactly.
to it. So I know it will be okay.
Yeah,
But my model was to do it while I'm in the corporate world. So I'm still sitting in the corporate world, 60, 70 hours a week. So now I've got to do all of that franchise business, from 6 to 9 at night and weekends and lunch and stuff like that. So, I didn't know if there was going to be people on here that were prospective, but it was really interesting to hear the challenges the others went through, and I will probably be reaching out to each of you individually just to kind of share the experiences.
thanks, Mark.
Thank you, guys.
John, any moments of, oh my gosh?
Oh, absolutely. One thing I wanted to kind of circle back to real quick was in terms of Shel and Mike, they both have, entered into franchise systems that have a high upfront investment that has to be made. The franchises that I have gone into all have a lower cost, initial capital cost, and you kind of build as you go. And so for those on the call that are looking for different franchise models, that's something that, not all franchises have, a large upfront capital expenditure. And so I just wanted to point that out in terms of, my experience in franchising in contrast to Shel and Michael. But yeah, I mean, with Furniture-Matic, I guess, was the easiest to get started. It just kind of flowed and rolled for me. Always Best Care. For 18 months of initially starting, I'm like, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? I just, I mean, I don't think that anybody can expect to just buy a franchise and walk out of a corporate job and, see that paycheck that they're accustomed to replaced every week, or the routine replaced every week. You're wearing a lot of different hats, and it's a learning process. And no pro forma and no business plan that you initially create looking into the business as opposed to being in the business is going to be as accurate as the lessons that you learn in your first couple of years. But then once you get through that, it's kind of, I mean, this is my third franchise concept, and it's once you get through that first initial growing pain, you dot your I's, you cross your T's, you stay persistent and diligent, it ultimately will reward you. It will reward you really well. But there is, not to use a cliche, but I will, no pain, no gain, and that's really what it boils down to. So that was Always Best Care. With Apex, I'm running into some struggles, but I just know that, hey, just keep on going. I shared with you earlier, I just thought that the concept of Apex, the fact that they can raise more than double what any other fundraiser can do for a school, that sort of thing would just immediately catch the attention of, your market that you're trying to get the attention of. But what I'm finding is that it's like, okay, almost to the point where it's like, this sounds too good to be true. I'm not going to even listen to you. So that's the hurdle that I'm trying to get over, and that's the big aha moment for me so far. But as I'm saying, I mean, I will persist. I will pursue. I do expect to have some. I've had some successful events already. They were smaller. I'm expecting to close 3 bigger events that will happen in the spring. And once that happens, then I have here's my proof. I mean, locally, this is what I've done with some schools, and here are my results. And I think that will start to get the attention of the market I'm going after. So, so that's that. So that's my experience.
John, I think you brought up a good point when you first started. So a lot of times clients, everybody has a different budget, right? And Shel and Michael's were very capital intensive. So just to give some of the folks here on the call some context, most of my clients invest anywhere from 400,000 all the way down to 50,000. And typically what you'll do is you'll put 20% down and you'll finance the rest. And there's lots of different ways to finance it through traditional bank loan or SBA, or there's a rollover you can do with your investments. But everybody has a different need, right? So Shel is in a physical location, right? His My Salon Suites, and Michael has a warehouse, and he's got the physical piece of the units themselves. But there's plenty of clients who just want to have a home office, right? Or even to get out of the house, they want to have a small office of 500 square feet. So everybody has a different need and a different want and a different budget. And when we sit down and chat, we have a deep dive conversation and we go through all of those elements to figure out, okay, what's going to be in alignment to explore, right? It's not about the investment in the beginning. It's what are we going to explore? Now, Morris asked a question that we answered before, which was, parlaying what you've done for the last 30 years into the new role. And whatever question anybody has, the answer you can usually get, and that is all through validation. And you're going to be asking that same question, and Shel shaking his head, and so is Michael. You're asking that same question to the franchisees, right? Everybody's been in your shoes before, for the most part. Most people aren't like John, who started out really just being an entrepreneur and starting their own business and then going right into another franchise. Most people have never done this before. They've never owned their own business. Even my clients who are CEOs and presidents who have run major organizations, when they start to explore, they're all fish out of water, which I find fascinating. And so it's all about asking the questions that are concerning you, okay, and that are giving you pause to ask those questions over and over and over again to franchisees. And you're going to start to hear a common theme. And sometimes when you hear only good things about the franchise, that's not enough to make you pull the trigger to want to invest in the franchise. You think it would be, but it's not. So the validation is essential. And there was one other thing. And having a healthy level of skepticism is totally normal. I mean, we're all human beings, right? So when we hear these things, we're like, could that really be, Can you only really work 10 hours a week? I mean, that doesn't even compute. But Shel's got a semi-absentee business, so it works, So anyway, I just wanted to share those thoughts. Something's popping up on my screen. Okay, there we go. Doug asked Shel a question: are all the 30 suites the same size and build out, or how do they differ when you may not know the tenant build out at the time? So I can answer that they're all not the same size, but I can't answer anything else, Shel.
Yeah, I actually was responding via the chat, Harris.
Oh, good.
So I responded and I gave some answers on that. And another thing that just came up on the chat, it depends on the location, that you happen to get, which was another thing with us. I mean, you have to have the right location, which is, there's a model for that in terms of where do you put a My Salon Suite? So it has to be kind of in a central area where there are a lot of salons, which is kind of counterintuitive, but, it can't be out in some remote area, it has to be in a very highly populated area, and then depending on where you end up with a space, you're going to have a facility that may have more windows or less windows. In my case, the building was a former executive center. It had, a brick side. So I got the landlord actually to cut through the brick and put windows in 8 suites where they wouldn't ordinarily be. So, all of that is part of the, negotiation, with the landlord. And, oh, by the way, I do want to point this out. There are many, in my particular case, since I joined, many of our franchisees now are actually owners of the building. So, with support, with people that the franchise has introduced franchisees to, a lot of the franchisees are actually buying their own building, and becoming, a landlord of My Salon Suite and maybe others. So there's some flexibility in terms of how that whole construction and startup, can be done within our particular franchise.
Thanks, Shel. So I know we're down to 4 minutes before 9:30, so we probably could keep talking for another hour, but I know we all have our lives to go on to and things to do. Zoe, do you want to share any additional information about Beacon, any upcoming events?
No, I just want to thank the 3 panelists. I certainly learned a lot. And I think just based on some of the chat messages people were leaving, I think everyone got a lot out of this panel. So thanks to you guys, and Harris, thanks for putting it together.
You got it. Yeah, thanks to the panelists. You've all been great. We got to take the show on the road more often.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.